Mr. Akshay. Namaskar. We are delighted to inform that as part of Symbiosis Golden Jubilee celebrations, Symbiosis Law School Noida, in association with Lex Witness, India's first magazine on legal and corporate affairs, has organized a webinar series titled Knowledge Series on Law and Advocacy. Leap 6 of the series is scheduled for today on the topic Taming the Unruly Horse, Public Policy in Indian Arbitration. It will be delivered by Mr. Gaurav Banerjee, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, former Additional Solicitor General of India, and Overseas Associate of Essex Court of Chambers. I take this honor to introduce Mr. Gaurav Banerjee to the August gathering. Mr. Gaurav Banerjee is Senior Advocate practicing mainly before the Supreme Court of India, as well as an arbitrator and arbitration counsel in a large number of domestic and international commercial arbitrations. He has represented the Republic of India in its investment treaty arbitrations. Mr. Gaurav graduated from the University of Cambridge in 1989 with first-class honors. He was called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn in 1990. Mr. Gaurav was designated as Senior Advocate in 2003 and served as the Additional Solicitor General of India from July 2009 to May 2014. He is an Overseas Associate of Essex Court of Chamber. I welcome you, sir. Now, I request Ms. Mayuri to take over the baton and explain the rules of housekeeping to the August gathering.
Ms. Mayuri, could you please unmute yourself? Thank you.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir. Before I invite sir to start the session, I must place before all the attendees the housekeeping rules. During the session, if you have any question, my request is that kindly place them in the Q&A box. And towards the end of the session, we will also permit live questions from the attendees. I will place the questions in the Q&A box before sir, as and when he will permit us. With this, I request sir to kindly start the session today.
Thank you, Professor, for that very kind introduction. And thank you to Symbiosis Law School for inviting me today to speak to you about a topic which is close to my heart. I have prepared this presentation and Professor Rawandale is in control of it. But before I go to the presentation, seeing that we have a number of students from the first to the fifth year and a varied audience, I just wanted to say a little bit about arbitration, because we are talking about arbitration. And one question that comes to mind from people who are not into arbitration is, what is this creature and how should we deal with this? You hear of courts being pro-arbitration, courts giving anti-arbitration judgments. What does this mean? Well, I mean, at a very simple level, the fundamental principle of arbitration is party autonomy. It means that you choose your arbitrator, you choose who it is that you want your disputes decided. And once the dispute is decided, then by and large, it is supposed to be final. Courts really should not be interfering. At least this is the theory of arbitration. But as you can understand, there is always an inherent tension between the courts and the arbitrators. Courts sometimes see something as unjust and may want to interfere. So there's that tension. Now, before I start the presentation, one more interesting thought I will leave you with. You know, we are supposedly expert practitioners in arbitration, but you know, that's a bit of a misnomer. I want to mention a gentleman by the name of Professor Pierre Lalive, who was one of the greats in arbitration. In 1983, there was a conference in Paris. And this conference was because 60 years had elapsed of the ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, ICA court. And Pierre Lalive was presiding over a part of the conference. And he brought these so-called fancy arbitration practitioners down to earth. He said, I want to mention three simple ideas. First, arbitration is not a panacea. It is only a means to an end. There is no such thing as arbitration. Arbitration in respect of a dispute which involves contract or clauses or investment. So it is a means to an end. Let's not forget that. Of course, it's alternative dispute resolution. It is promoted by most countries and including India. The second fact he said is it is not that all awards are worthy of being respected. There's no sanctity of awards. There may be good awards, there may be bad awards. That's the second point arbitration practitioners must keep in mind. And the third is that the reality is that the courts will have a measure of control on arbitration. So these are three thoughts that I want to put in your mind as when you deal with arbitration. When you hear people saying, India is pro-arbitration, India is not pro-arbitration, it's not that simple. So with that background and just keeping that thought in mind, this is the topic I've selected. It's called Taming the Unruly Horse, Public Policy in Indian Arbitration. Now, what is this phrase, taming the unruly horse? You see the horse and you see this gentleman trying to, this child trying to control the unruly horse. This is a very famous quote from a judgment. And if we could just see the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a judgment by a gentleman called Justice Burrows in Richardson and Mellish, and it's a quotation you will find repeated and repeated and repeated. Public policy, it is a very unruly horse, and when you once get astride it, you never know where it will carry you. It may lead you from sound law. So that is the concept of public policy. But interestingly, everybody quotes this. Nobody sees the judgment. You see the judgment on the right of the page. That's just a photo from this book which has the judgment. But if you have the time and the inclination, please read this judgment just for the fun of it. It's a judgment which deals with the East India Company. It has nothing to do with arbitration. It deals with the East India Company. It deals with a gentleman by the name of Captain Richardson, how he entered into a contract with somebody to sell. He was the captain of the ship. He sold his captaincy to the nephew of another gentleman, and whether this was legal. Can you sell your captaincy in a ship chartered by the East India Company for 6 voyages to India? So it has a lot of history, and it's a beautiful factual case. Just for that purpose, it would be nice to read. It has nothing to do with arbitration in particular, but it certainly explained public policy, and it was held there that it was not illegal to make such a contract. It was not an illegality. So that is where we get the quotation of Justice Burrows. Could we just move on to the next one, please? So this is a very well-known case, again, not to do with arbitration, but I mentioned it. You can see the Howrah Bridge there. It's a case called Central Inland Water Transport Corporation versus Brojonath Ganguly. Many of you would have heard of it. This is nothing to do with arbitration, but this is a case, you will realize it's in the mid-80s. And there was a hire and fire rule of a government company. Basically 3 months, 3 months notice, and if 3 months without any reasons, terminated. Now, this was challenged on the ground that it is contrary to Article 14 of the Constitution, and it is contrary to public policy. And this is the first case, not in an arbitration context, where we find an exposition of what is this public policy. What does this phrase public policy mean? Because public policy is not only found in the Arbitration Act, it is in fact found in Section 23 of our Contract Act, that contracts which are contrary to public policy are void. And basing himself on that, Justice Madden, DP Madden, actually found that this clause of hire and fire of 3 months without reasons, without inquiry, was contrary to Indian public policy. And you must understand, I mean, I wonder whether the same judgment would come today or not. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, because obviously we are now in a very different political space in 2020, where in the 1980s we were much more of a socialistic Now, after liberalization, perhaps the lens may have changed, but this is still good law. And for your reference, you can note para 92, where Justice Madden tries to explain what is public policy. And he goes so far as saying that in an appropriate situation, public policy is capable of expansion or modification, and practices which were considered perfectly normal at one time have today become obnoxious and oppressive to public conscience. If there's no head of public policy which covers a case, then the court must, in consonance with public conscience, keeping with public good, public interest, declare such practice to be opposed to public policy. So Justice D.P. Madden, in a context very different from arbitration, said, well, public policy is capable of expansion. And he expanded it and he struck down. So just this is another dimension which normally arbitration lawyers really don't look at things like this. But we must understand that public policies is a flexible concept. So with that, let's go on to the next slide. So this is a very well-known gentleman called Jan Paulsen, who's a worldwide figure in arbitration. At present, he's based, I believe, in Qatar, but he's a world-renowned figure, and he was of the view that the courts in India, and this is 89, you can understand his views then. Courts in India have revealed an alarming propensity to exercise authority in a manner contrary to the legitimate expectations of the international community. You must realize in the 1970s and 1980s, there were judgments of the Indian courts. And I don't criticize it like Jan Paulsen is criticizing it. It was a different era, it was a different time. But the world arbitration community was very, very, shall we say, disturbed by the way the courts in India were interfering in arbitration matters. And they were painting Indian courts as in some fashion anti-arbitration. But this was the late 80s. And then what happened was, as you all know, that 1991 liberalization happened, 92 onwards. And then we come now to the first major part of the development of Indian law. And could we have the next slide, please? So this just says part one. You'll say part one of what? Well, as you know today, most of you know, many of you know, today what governs Indian arbitration and Indian arbitration law is the Arbitration and Conciliation Act of 1996. And it has two parts which we are concerned with. Part one, which is domestic, and part two, which is foreign seated arbitration. So therefore, part one means part one of the 96 Act. Pausing here for a moment, I just wanted to say something of interest, which we still call it the new Act. It's no longer the new Act. It's 24 years old, so it can't really be the new Act. But the reason we call it the new Act was there was a 1940 Act, which we call the old Act, which had all sorts of problems and was highly criticized in many cases. And this new Act was brought in 1996. And the basis of the new Act, and we can find that in the next slide, is what is called the UNCITRAL Model Law of 1985. And you will find here that there's a little catch here. The UNCITRAL Model Law in India is a founder member of UNCITRAL, which is a UN body. And I've had the privilege of representing India in UNCITRAL meetings. The model law was not meant for domestic matters alone. It was meant for domestic matters which involve international commercial arbitration, basically arbitration between a domestic party and a foreign party, not for purely domestic disputes between A and B. But what happened in 1995, 96, and I have some personal knowledge of this, that overnight under by the form of an ordinance, an absolutely new act was introduced in 96, 95, 96, which was based on a copy, cut, paste of the model law, with some changes, of course, which were even harsher than the model law, but we won't go into it today. But one of the changes was that Article 34 of the model law, sorry, one of the changes from the old law was that this Article 34 of the model law was copied, and it is titled recourse against award. And one of the grounds for challenging an award is if it is in conflict with the public policy of the state, of whichever state it is. So this is a model law, and this model law was then implemented. And if you could just go back just go to the next slide, please. So this was the section which was brought in 1996, and as you can see, is just a copy of the section which is of the model law. It's just copied. It's an exact copy. And the phrase is conflict with the public policy. The problem with this is there is no definition of public policy. So what does public policy mean? The unruly horse? We don't know. 96, this new act comes in. Now, obviously, when a new act comes in, it is tested before the courts. Somebody who feels that he has not got an award, he's lost, the award has gone against him, will necessarily challenge it. Indians are litigious. They will necessarily challenge it. So it was challenged. And when it was challenged, it came up before the courts. And one of the big judgments, one of the controversial judgments is if we could move on to the next slide, please, is the case of ONGC versus SAW Pipes. Now, any of you who have any nodding acquaintance with arbitration will say, well, such a bad case. It's such a bad case. SAW Pipes, basically, it was a case where SAW Pipes was to supply offshore oil exploration equipment. They supplied it late. ONGC said there was delayed delivery. ONGC said you pay me liquidated damages. It's almost as simple as that. Matter went to the tribunal. Tribunal says, yes, we agree with everything you say, ONGC, but tough luck, you will not get a single rupee as liquidated damages because you have, in some sense, been unable to prove your loss. Now, the problem is in an oil exploration situation, it is very difficult to prove loss. Anyway, this case then came to the Supreme Court. And I must tell you anecdotally what happened. But before I tell you that, let us see the next slide. This is a criticism by one of our greatest lawyers and a great arbitration lawyer. And Mr. Nariman basically was scathing in his criticisms. And he said the judgment virtually set it, not the entire act. If courts continue to hold that the last word on facts and law, notwithstanding consensual agreements to refer facts necessarily involving facts and law to adjudication arbitration, 96 Act might as well be scrapped. Division bench of 2 judges has altered the entire roadmap, put the clock back to where we started under the old 1940 Act. Now, not only Mr. Nariman, other people also had very similar criticism. But I want to actually say something different. You know, it is very easy to criticize. This is a lecture by Mr. Nariman just after the judgment came out. But I have a slightly different view on this. And maybe my view is colored because in some sense, I was associated with this case on the winning side, on ONGC side. You know, when this matter was being argued, and because this is a topic, this is a lecture series both on knowledge and advocacy. This matter was being argued by Mr. Ashok Desai for ONGC. And I was one of the many juniors floating around. And he said, I remember him saying, unfortunately, he's no more, he passed away this year very sadly. I remember him saying, with this new act, how will the court interfere? So some massive research was done here and there, left and right, and a case and a ground was discovered in the US called manifest disregard. And Mr. Desai somehow managed to persuade the 2-judge bench to invent, and there's no other word for it, invent a category of patent illegality. similar to manifest disregard. I remember this phrase being suggested by you and then bought by the court. And you will say, well, how can you rewrite the law? Why should you rewrite the law? And this is where we come to the concept of pro and anti arbitration. You see, the problem here is that when the 96 Act came, it was designed for international commercial arbitration, where you have a foreign party and an Indian party. Both of them may be at the same level. You have sophisticated lawyers, you have sophisticated judges or arbitrators. Then you don't wish to interfere. Public policy can be narrow. But in a purely domestic situation, the thinking may be very different. We have all experience of arbitration where we have awards which are, in the words of Pierre Lalive, not really capable of being respected. And with respect to this award, with the deepest of respect, the award was just extremely arbitrary, extremely patently illegal and wrong. So in a domestic situation, perhaps if the act had been correctly calibrated, we would have had a different standard for judging public policy other than that for international commercial arbitration. So yes, Mr. Nariman was right that the law was perhaps laid down wrongly, but his comment that the 1906 Act should be scrapped was perhaps a little bit of hyperbole and a little bit of annoyance that the courts had not understood the impact of the judgment in ONGC. So ONGC is controversial, but ONGC is today the law in a very different way. So ONGC's ghost has been resurrected and is very much there, and I'll come to that later. So if we could just move on to the next stage. So after the ONGC saw pipes, there was yet another judgment, which is again very controversial. This is ONGC Western Gecko, which you see on the screen. Again, for some coincidental reason involving ONGC again. But here a three-judge bench. The three-judge bench took a little wide view of public policy. Now, again, you have to understand this was in a domestic situation, in a domestic dispute. Three judges took a wide view of public policy. It introduced into public policy some concepts of Wednesbury unreasonableness, perversity. Again, there was a massive hue and cry when this judgment came out in 2014. I remember a lot of people criticizing it. And I'll just tell you some of the passages which were problematic here. They talked about judicial approach. They talked about perversity, irrationality, no reasonable person, Wednesbury test. So that is how public policy was expanded in some sense. It's written by Justice Thakur, very distinguished, one of our distinguished Chief Justice of India. But the criticism again by, I would call the sort of the arbitration lobby was, well, these are not specialists in arbitration. But I think they forgot to take a step back and understand the policy. The policy is that in purely domestic areas, there ought to be a little more interference, and perhaps public policy should have been read a little wider. But anyway, this was Western Gecko. There's a lot of controversy. Immediately after Western Gecko, we had the next major judgment, and if we can just move on to the next slide, please. So this is Associate Builders versus DDA, 2015, 3 SCC 49. Very interesting judgment. This judgment is now written by Rohinton Nariman, sitting with Justice Ranjan Gogoi, two judges. Now, Justice Nariman perhaps had a more international vision and a better understanding of commercial matters and arbitration matters than the earlier bench, perhaps. Nobody can dispute his brilliance. And he, though sitting in two judges, he deliberately, with care, tried to curtail the scope of Western Gecko. And what he did was very carefully analyze the different headings of public policy. And he went into the fundamental public policy of India. He went into what it means for the interest of India. What do you mean by justice? What do you mean by morality? What do you mean by patent illegality? Each of these. So he tried in his own way to tame the unruly horse. He tried to curtail, tame it by putting it in some classification, in some heading, in some subheading. So if you want to understand public policy law, disregard all the earlier cases I've told you. This is one good summary of the law. So he explains what is the fundamental policy of India. He explains, interests of India, which is a bit woolly. He explains justice, what do you mean by morality? How do you shock the conscience? The fact that you merely make an error on construing a contract or the interpretation isn't to your liking may not be grounds of interference. So he then tries to curtail the scope of public policy. We then move on to a major watershed moment in India on taming the unruly horse. So if we could just go to the next slide. This is a very important report by the Law Commission. Normally, Law Commission reports are disregarded. But this was a report authored by Justice A.P. Shah, who had a particularly keen interest in arbitration. He associated a lot of people with it. Rohinton Nariman was associated with it before he became a judge. Some youngsters were associated with it, and he had a wide consultation. I remember as ASG, there was an exchange of correspondence. I was also involved, and he decided to really put the law on a really a different footing, a more stable and surer footing. There are parts of this Law Commission report which I don't agree with. We had a dialogue. He disagreed with some things I said, but it's a very well crafted report. And if we could just go on to the next slide, please. So this was the result of that report, which was the Amendment Act of 2015. And as a result of that, if we can go on to the next slide, please. The Act 34(2)B was amended, and he did something quite clever, or rather the Law Commission did something quite clever, and the Law Commission thought this through on part 1 and part 2. They made some recommendations for part 1, which is domestic. Part 2, which is foreign. Basically, if you're seated abroad, it's a foreign award. Basically, if it's seated, if the arbitration happens in India, the place is in India. That's the basic distinction between part 1 and 2. We can go into the details, but for our present purposes, we can stick to this. Now, if you see on the screen, a couple of things happen. There is 2 explanations are inserted into 34(2)B. For the avoidance of doubt, it is clarified that an award is in conflict with the public policy of India if 1. The making of the award was introduced or affected by fraud or corruption violated 7581. So this is fraud, corruption, obvious ground. 2. It is in contravention of with the fundamental policy of Indian law. Or 3. It is in conflict with the most basic notions of morality and justice. So for the first time in the world, an attempt is made to legislatively define and curtail public policy interference in arbitration. A legislative act defining what is public policy. And these 2 phrases which you find, fundamental policy of Indian law, most basic notions of morality, please note these, because I will come back to these phrases. There is an origin story to these 2 phrases. Where do these 2 phrases come from? And that's a mystery which I will answer a little later. And secondly, he says, for the avoidance of doubt, the test is to whether there's a contravention to fundamental policy of India law shall not entail review of the merits of the dispute. This is essentially to curtail or to override the Western Gecko judgment. So in fact, in the supplemental report of the Law Commission, the Western Gecko judgment is specifically dealt with, and these two explanations are suggested and brought in. And 2A is where ONGC's ghost is resurrected. An arbitral award, and I would in some small way claim credit in some 5% way for this resurrection. Award arising out of arbitrations other than international commercial arbitrations may also be set aside by the court if the court finds that the award is vitiated by patent illegality, a phrase picked up from ONGC, appearing on the face of award, provided that the award shall not be set aside merely on the ground of erroneous application law by the appreciation of evidence. So patent illegality now actually becomes a statutory ground carved out of public policy, separated from public policy. Public policy is narrowed. ONGC view is split into two. Public policy is narrow. Patent illegality is a separate head brought in legislatively. ONGC revives, but only for domestic award. This two-tier system, that for international commercial arbitration, narrow test, for domestic awards, other domestic awards, broader test, is reflective of reality in India. That yes, there may be awards in India which may not be contrary to public policy, but may otherwise be patently illegal, such as the Saw Pipes Award. So courts should interfere. So back to PL Lalit, some awards are not sacrosanct, and courts have to exercise some degree of control. So this is a major step, I would say, forward in the Indian story of taming the unruly horse. Now we move on to a couple of more judgments on this aspect. This is again Justice Nariman back in action in a case called SsangYong versus NHAI. Now what is important, again, I had mentioned Associated Builders. Associated Builders was before the amendment. Now SsangYong comes after the amendment. Again, Justice Nariman, it's a very simple case, but I think he takes it as an example, a convenient peg to hang the judgment on. It was a case where the tribunal, it was a dispute between NHAI, you've all heard of NHAI, National Highway Authority, and the construction company. And what the award had done is, they had simply, there were some issues regarding price adjustment. SsangYong had claimed some price adjustment. What the tribunal had done is they had applied a circular which SsangYong didn't even know about, the majority. The minority had stuck to the contract. The majority had applied this circular. Anyway, when the case comes up, Justice Nariman uses this opportunity, 2019-15 SCC. He uses 131, and I'll just mention the case. This is the second case that I would think that you might want to look at. It's again a two-judge bench, but he takes the opportunity. He explains away Western Gecko. He explains Associated Builders. So this is now the Bible for challenge. So Western Gecko, he says that some portions of Western Gecko are obliterated by the 2015 amendment. Some portions survive, some portions obliterated. Then he basically refers back to Western Gecko. He refers back to Associated Builders, and he now tells you which of the paragraphs of Associated Builders survives today. So in fact, you have to read both of them together to find out what is the law. Ideally, in this one judgment, he could have set out Associated Builders also, so we would not have to refer back. But he again analyzes very carefully, what do you mean by patent illegality? What do you mean by public policy? And interestingly, in this matter, a pro-arbitration judge like Justice Nariman sets aside the award. He finds that the award is not capable of meeting the test of most basic notions of justice. He sets aside the award. He says, look, the arbitral tribunal got it wrong. They introduced a circular which SsangYong had not signed off. Then he does something even more drastic, which obviously only the Supreme Court can do under 142. He restores the minority award as the majority award, which is a debatable solution. But of course, in the interest of justice, the Supreme Court, to cut short litigation, could perhaps have done it. But it's an interesting judgment for two reasons. It summarizes the law, and two, on the facts, it sets aside the award. So when pro-arbitration lawyers keep telling you, no, award should not be set aside, award should not be set aside, award should not be interfered with, sometimes they lose track of the wood for the trees. So this is SsangYong. And the last judgment I want to mention under part 1 is the latest judgment, which is the next judgment, which is the next slide, which is a judgment called Patel Engineering versus NIPCO. So this was again a contract from the Northeast. It was an interesting case because the Guwahati High Court had set aside the award. The Guwahati High Court had set aside the award. The Guwahati High Court had made a mistake. The Guwahati High Court, while setting aside the award, had extensively quoted from Western Gecko, which you would have seen is not fully reflected in the 2015 amendment. So they had made a mistake. SLP had been dismissed. A review was filed. A very detailed judgment was given by a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court in this matter. Justice Bhanumati, Justice Indu Malhotra, and Justice Anirudh Bose, all of whom have had some experience in arbitration, particularly, of course, Justice Indu Malhotra is an expert on the field, but it's an order. We don't know who wrote it. But what is interesting about this order is that the Supreme Court upholds setting aside of the award on the ground of patent illegality, and said, no doubt the High Court is wrong by relying on Western Gecko, but doesn't matter. We will uphold setting aside of the award. We will say that it is patently illegal. We will dismiss the SLP on the review point also. So it is not the case that awards are not being set aside. Awards are being set aside, and such awards being set aside are being upheld by the Supreme Court. There are other judgments of the Supreme Court in recent times. I will not trouble you with that. So at this stage, I will go on to the second part of my presentation. We have another half an hour, and then we can look at the questions. So now we come to a more interesting part because it is a more current issue. So this is a little more esoteric. You might not come across this every day, even in arbitration practice. So we have what is called Part 2 of the 1996 Act. And what happens in Part 2 of the 1996 Act is that India is implementing what is called the New York Convention. And if you can just go to the next slide, please. So there is a New York Convention of 1958. It is probably the most celebrated convention in international commercial law. As of today, no less than 166 countries have signed it. India was one of the founder signatories in 1958-1960. In fact, C.K. Daftari, then Solicitor General of India, represented India at the New York Convention conference, and he was elected, I believe, the vice chairman of the conference. So we participated in this. We signed off on the New York Convention. We implemented it by the Foreign Awards Recognition Act, Enforcement Act of 1961, despite which we have had an up and down interaction or engagement with the New York Convention. Some of our judgments of the Supreme Court in earlier years have been quite quote unquote anti-arbitration. And that is why people like Jan Poulsen have been critical. But that is not really the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter comes from a very, very important case, which is the next slide, which has been described by Justice Nariman as a celebrated case. This is the word he used, the celebrated judgment of Renu Sagar versus General Electric. This was you can use whatever vocabulary you want. It was basically just a massively important judgment. You can see a power plant. It was a dispute regarding the setting up of this power plant. General Electric was supplying the equipment. Renu Sagar was setting up the power plant. There were 2 or 3 rounds of litigation. This is called Renu Sagar 2. This is the second round. It was a clash of the titans. It was argued, I believe, I remember, not I believe, I remember during the summer holidays. Renu Sagar was represented by Mr. K.K. Venugopal, now Attorney General of India, and General Electric was represented by Mr. Shanti Bhushan. And I was one of, I think, the third or the fifth or the eighth junior. So I had some very peripheral role to play, but it was certainly a learning experience. It was a clash of the titles. It was a ICC award, and Renu Sagar, General Electric won the matter, and they wanted to enforce the award against Renu Sagar in India. And this matter went on before three judges, I believe Justice Anand, Suresh Agarwal, the third name is escaping me, just give me a second. Justice Anand, Justice S.C. Agarwal, who wrote the judgment, and Chief Justice Venkatacharya, of course, who can forget him. But what is interesting is, this is the judgment which first in our jurisprudence defines public policy in the context of the New York Convention. Because as you've seen, the New York Convention has the same language, which is public policy. But there is no definition of public policy. So here, Justice Suresh Agarwal, and it's a judgment worth the read. Detailed analysis of international precedents, and he then, in paragraph 66 of this judgment, formulates this test. And he said, applying the said criteria, it must be held that the enforcement of a foreign award would be refused on the ground that it is contrary to public policy if such enforcement would be contrary to 1, fundamental policy of Indian law, 2, interest of India, 3, justice and morality. So if you just see the next slide, please. So this is the test formulated by S.C. Agarwal in that Renu Sagar judgment, and you will find that some of this language is now reflected in our law in section 34 and section 48. This is the language which is now put into our legislation. So it is very forward thinking that in 1994 such a formulation is there. Now if you see the three phrases, fundamental policy of Indian law still exists, interest of India has gone, and justice or morality has been replaced by the most basic notions of justice and morality. So this was the Renu Sagar test. So I'll come to that, how it's changed later. But after the Renu Sagar test, what happens is, this issue also comes up in court. And one of the cases where it comes up is this case of Poolchand Exports versus O Patriot, 2011 10 SCC. And as you can see that this is a case of export of rice, and which is why you've got that photo there of export of rice. And what is very interesting about this case is that it is a two-judge bench. And it's a very interesting two-judge bench. It is a bench of Justice R.M. Lodha and Justice J.S. Kehar, both later to become Chief Justices of India. And Justice R.M. Lodha essentially, Justice R.M. Lodha authors the judgment, and I'll tell you why I mentioned the name. Normally, it is of not much consequence, but it's something to note. So he then says, well, it's an award by the Chamber of Commerce in Moscow, and whether it should be enforced or not. But while he discusses this award, and he discusses the merits of the challenge, the submission before him is, please don't apply the Renu Sagar test, apply the saw pipes test. Now you understand Renu Sagar is very narrow, which you saw. Saw pipes has that patent illegality. And for some reason, Justice Lodha is persuaded. And he says, okay, now under the 1996 Act, the saw pipes test will rule, not the Renu Sagar test, which was under the 1961 Act. So he says that the wider ground of public policy should be accepted, and Mr. Krishnan Venugopal's arguments are accepted. Now, this is again a judgment which was criticized because under the New York Convention, the general law is that you must have a very narrow ground of challenge. And the idea is simple. You should be able to challenge the award where it has been made. So supposing the award was made in England or Russia, wherever, you challenge it there. When it comes to India, the challenge is much narrower. That is the philosophy of the New York Convention. But anyway, he gives the judgment in Phulchang. Now something very interesting happens, and if we could please go to the next slide. So this is a case of Sri Lal Mahal versus Progetto Grano Spa, 2014 to SCC 433. This was a grain contract, and that is why you see a picture of grain. It was an export of a grain, and it was a case under the Grain and Feed Trade Association, London, GAFTA. Now, please note the bench. The bench is R.M. Lodha, Madan Lokur, and Kurian Joseph JJ. This judgment is authored again by R.M. Lodha. That judgment was also by R.M. Lodha. This judgment is again by R.M. R.M. Lodha J says, and this is an extraordinary testament to his intellectual humility. He says, I was wrong. I can't think of many judges, High Court or Supreme Court, who have the humility to say that I am wrong in a judgment. My own judgment is wrong. He actually overrules his own judgment. In this case, 3 judges overruled 2 judges. He says, no, the correct test must necessarily be the Renu Sagar test. Part 1 is different. Part 1 is domestic. ONGC saw pipes only applies to domestic. I have to follow the New York Convention. I have to follow Renu Sagar. And he restores the Renu Sagar test. So it's an extraordinary judgment by an extraordinary judge. I really doubt anybody very few judges would have the courage to do this. So he sets the track back on the right path in part 2, because you have to understand there's a fundamental difference between part 1 and part 2. In part 1, it's an Indian award. Indian courts are looking at an Indian award. We can determine what is a good or a bad award. But if it's a foreign award from a foreign court, then the philosophy of the New York Convention is that there's a pro-enforcement bias. You should not be tampering too much. You should be more circumspect while refusing to enforce. So a seat court can set aside an award. A foreign jurisdiction can only refuse to enforce that award in that country. That's the philosophy. So now, I mean, looking at the time, I'm coming to the last 3 main developments which happen. Now, after Lal Mahal, the section 48, which is similar to 34, section 48, which is Article 5 of the New York Convention, is amended. Along the same lines, those same 2 explanations are inserted here by the Law Commission. Now I come to the next slide. And I must tell you a little bit about what has happened in 2020. So in 2020, there have been 3, possibly 4 landmark judgments of the Supreme Court on public policy, but in the context of Part 2. And unfortunately for us, each has gone its own way. So the first judgment is this one, which you see on your screen. It is called Vijay Karya versus Prismian Kavi A Sistemi. I was in some sense tangentially involved in this in a connected litigation. But again, this is a judgment of Justice Nariman. Again, like Associated Builders and Sanyong for Part 1, if you are to only read one judgment, this is the judgment to read. This is a judgment. He traces the entire history of the New York Convention. He looks at the law all over the world. He then defines the scope of public policy. He takes into account Renu Sagar. He takes into account Sri Lal Mahal. He explains all of that. Then he looks at the award, which has been passed, 4 awards which has been passed, he dismisses the appeal of Vijay Karya, and unbelievably, he imposes 50 lakhs costs for wasting the time of the court. 50 lakhs. It's an astonishing figure. Our courts never do anything like that. But he says to deter people from challenging foreign awards on frivolous grounds, 50 lakhs costs. So that is Vijay Karya. We go on to the next one. Soon thereafter, there is a judgment of NAFED versus Alimenta. Very controversial judgment. This is under the old act, the Foreign Awards Regulation, Recognition and Enforcement Act, 1961. In this case, another 3 judgment doesn't notice Prysmian, maybe because this judgment had been reserved before that judgment came out. So maybe it was not brought to their notice. But this judgment has been criticized by virtually all commentators, because here the court seems to enter into the merits of the matter. It refers to Central Inland Water Transport, it refers to SAW pipes, it refers to Renu Sagar, and ultimately refuses to enforce the award. Now, my understanding of this case, and we can go into it if one wants, is it is the right judgment for the wrong reasons. There's many things in this case that could be criticized. Alimenta's conduct was dicey. They went ahead with the arbitration despite an order of the Delhi High Court preventing it. The arbitrator for Alimenta then appeared as their lawyer. All sorts of things happened. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court did not hold on those grounds. The Supreme Court said that since there was an export ban, it is contrary to public policy. And therefore, the award is not to be enforced. What is very interesting about this case, and I just want to mention it casually, is that there was a very similar judgment. Sorry, can we go to the next slide, please? I think we missed, yeah. Thank you. We'll just come to Vedanta, but before that, I just want to mention one more thing about Alimenta, that there was a similar judgment of Justice Wadhwa in COSID versus SAIL sometime in the 80s, and nobody even criticized it. Just Mr. Parasaran, who was then the Attorney General, appeared, and what was refused to be enforced. But that is another story. So this is the 3rd judgment which has come out by the Supreme Court on public policy. This is a judgment by Justice Indu Malhotra. Again, a very interesting dispute between the Government of India and Vedanta, which was earlier Cairn. And you see an oil well. And basically, this case was about the Rava oil fields. And there was a dispute about the shall we say, the development costs of that field. And let me tell you, when I was involved because the Honorable Supreme Court appointed me an amicus in this matter. So I appeared in this matter as an amicus, even though the learned AG, Mr. Venugopal, was appearing for Government of India, and Vedanta was being represented by Mr. Sundaram, and Mr. Salvi also intervened on behalf of Reliance. I was the amicus in this matter. And it's a judgment of Justice Indu Malhotra. Again, it's worth a read because she has analyzed the New York Convention. And she also analyzes public policy and ultimately holds that we will not interfere on the grounds of contrary to Indian public policy. But let me tell you, when I read the case, I was a little doubtful of the award. The award seemed to be a little dodgy. But anyway, they took a conservative view. Public policy was narrowly interpreted. And again, if I was to ask you to read one more judgment, so I have asked you to look at 3, and this is the 4th Indian judgment. This is just a great explanation of how the New York Convention works. And it is written by Justice Indu Malhotra, who of course has written a book on arbitration, and therefore it's definitely worth a read. So I just come to the final couple of slides. The second last slide, if we can come to the one after this. So this is Banyan Tree. This is again, the only reason I mention it is, this is again enforcement of a foreign award. Again, the ground of challenge was public policy. It came up to the Supreme Court, and Justice Nariman imposed 10 lakh costs at the SLP stage in 3 matters. So 30 lakh costs, and dismissed the SLP. So that's why I mentioned Banyan Tree. and I have now effectively come to the end of my presentation. We have a look at the last slide, please. So this is the question: has the unruly horse been tamed? In the words of Lord Denning, which is quoted by Justice D.P. Madden in the case of Central England, and I'll read out to you what he says about this. He says, "The master of the rolls, Lord Denning, however, was not a man to shy away from unmanageable horses, and in words which conjure up before our eyes the picture of the young Alexander the Great taming Bucephalus, he said in Enderby Town Football Club versus Football Association, with a good man in the saddle, the unruly horse can be kept in control. It can jump over obstacles." So the question that I leave you with is, and the topic that I started with is, has the unruly horse been tamed, or is it going sideways, forwards, back? So that's the question to which I think we will have to see as to what is the answer. So I am happy to take questions in whichever format Mayuri would like me to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I, if there is no raised hand at the moment, may I please place before sir the question which I have in the Q&A box?
Ms. Mayuri, I just have one raised hand as of now. If I can bring the same live.
Sir,
S.
would you like-
Shridhar, please unmute yourself and ask your question live.
Yes, sir. Good evening to all the panelists. Thank you for this very informative. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening to all the panelists. I was really interested. It was an intriguing session. I was really inspired by the cases that you mentioned, and it was a very insightful session. I would like to ask one question. With the India is being criticized for the new with the model BIT. India is being criticized for the FET clauses, and with the Vodafone judgment recently, India is also criticized for its taxation laws. How can we improve our taxation laws with regards to arbitration? That was a question in my mind.
Okay. Though strictly not within the topic, I'm happy to answer this. Having been involved in some fashion in some of these matters, you see, there's a simple answer to this. The answer is this: what is the problem with our taxation law? The problem in Vodafone was, or perceived to be was, I'm not committing myself because I've appeared in some of these matters for the government. The problem was that you changed the goalposts much after the event. Nobody really can criticize the fact that Vodafone ought to have been taxed. The nature of the transaction was such that actually a capital asset in India was being affected, if you remember the Vodafone facts. And in all these cases, what happens is some two foreigners go outside, they sell shares from one company to another abroad, but the impact of that is in India, and therefore capital gains tax ought to be paid. So that's the ought to theory. But the problem that has happened is this: we changed the goalpost retrospectively after the transaction had taken place many years ago. After the transaction takes place, then you have the litigation, then you have the High Court, which was in favor of the government of India, by the way, Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud no less. Then you have the Supreme Court of Justice Kapadia. Then you have the retrospective amendment. In fact, Justice Kapadia and I had this conversation in court after the judgment was delivered and the amendment came, because I was appearing as ASG. He said, Mr. Banerjee, we have no difficulty, you make retrospective amendments, but please don't make retrospective amendments so far in the past. Look at the conduct of, say, the UK Inland Revenue. They have also made the similar retrospective amendment, but it's 6 months a year, 6 months a year. The government is just, the short answer to your question, Sridhar, is that the way we can avoid these problems is to have our legislations in place quickly. Even mild retrospectivity doesn't matter. So that's how we can avoid this FET problem, this investment treaty dispute problem, these awards and BITs, etc. just by better governance. That's really the answer. I hope that's answered your
Okay,
question.
sir. Thank you, sir.
So I believe there are some.
Over to you, Ms. Mayuri now.
Thank you, sir. So there are a couple of questions that have come in the Q&A box. With your permission, may I place them before you?
Please.
Thank you, sir. So there is one question which has come from the anonymous attendee. And the question is, do you think the public policy position in India is now settled with similar approaches under Vedanta and Vijay Karya?
I would say, so that's an interesting question. I think the answer is yes and no. So far as part 1 is concerned, which also has public policy, I think the answer is yes, because in most cases, patent illegality covers all situations where you want to challenge an award. So I think part 1 public policy after the amendment is now settled. Part 2 public policy is not settled. Vijay Karya and Vedanta point in one direction. NAFED Alimenta points in another direction. Vijay Karya and Vedanta probably will now be followed, and NAFED will be treated as an outlier, despite the fact that large number of people have criticized it. One point I want to make about NAFED is, every time our court gives a judgment which is quote unquote slightly anti-arbitration, I'm using this phrase carefully, anti-arbitration, there's no such thing as pro and anti. Suddenly, you have this outburst of articles from Indians and Indians abroad saying how horrible our court is. I think as a country, as a nation, we are so good at criticizing ourselves. NAFED can be justified on another ground. I went to Singapore when the 2015 Act came out, when we had introduced a time limit of, this 12-month time limit in arbitration that is there. And everybody in India was criticizing it. A lot of retired judges, how will we finish in 12 months? How will this arbitration get? And today it has turned out to be excellent. But just to digress a bit, I went to Singapore, defended this 12 months. This must have been 2015-16. After everything was over, all the Singaporeans, of course, they will always praise their system. They will never make the mistake of criticizing their system. One old man, Singaporean gentleman, came to me and said, "Sir, this is a very good thing you've done." Quietly, he told me. He said, "We have a retired Chief Justice of Singapore. He has an award in my case. He has not pronounced it in 3 years." So my answer is that before we start criticizing our courts, we should understand the context in which it is there. And yes, we should criticize, but we should criticize in a nuanced fashion. We should not rush to judgment and simply start beating up the Supreme Court judgment. There is much to criticize in NAFED, but on the facts, it could have been done in a better way. So that the answer therefore is 2 judgments one way, 1 judgment the other way. So not settled yet, almost settled.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Mayuri, with your permission, can I put in a live question now?
Yes.
Rajneesh Jindal, please unmute yourself and ask your question live.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this wonderful session, actually. And I'm Rajneesh Jindal, and I would like to ask one pertinent question with respect to public policy. See, the recent amendment which actually has happened in 2019 with respect to Arbitration Act.
Right.
So there was a provision for the Arbitration Council of India, and when we read the preamble of this Arbitration Conciliation Act, actually the Amendment Act. So the ultimate policy objective was to achieve the objective of making India as an international hub at par with Singapore. But it is now nearly more than 1 year, and till now, nothing is actually has happened, or you can say on ground. Basically, the things are not visible. So my point is, when India is wishing to be an international hub of arbitration, and actually we can do this thing. But when we talk about the policy, So the things are not as such visible when we come to the reality, sir. So what exactly should be the solution to cope up with this particular issue?
So let me answer not in a generality, but specifically. You are right. There was a concept of Arbitration Council of India, and I have some knowledge and some understanding background of this. There was a problem in the amendment because of two reasons. The one the 2020 ordinance has solved, which is that foreigners could not be Indian arbitrators. That issue is over now. But the idea of the Arbitration Council of India was to accredit the high-level committee, of which Justice Indhu Malhotra was also a party, Justice Sri Krishna was heading it. Basically, the idea was we have an arbitration council which will be in light of accreditation. Just say whether some institution is good or not, some arbitrators bad or not. But the amendment seems to suggest that they will supervise and control arbitrators and arbitral institutions. So it's not merely just giving a accreditation, but it was controlled. And that was not the intention of the high-level committee. That debate is going on because the composition of the council is very government heavy. And moment you bring in something like that, unlike say for instance SEAC, which is funded totally by the Singapore government, but is otherwise independent, Gary Bond is the head, etc. Here there's a heavyweight appointment of government officials. So how to appoint people, who will be the chairperson, who will be the member, who will have credibility internationally. So that's why it is stalled. So, it is, you are right, it should have happened. 1 year has gone, but I know this debate is going on, and perhaps we'll have a solution soon. Maybe because of COVID, etc., it has been stalled, but we'll have a solution, and other steps are being taken. It is not as if it's not being taken. ICADR, this government has taken over, etc. There are some other issues to be ironed out. So yes, you are right. It should be, but it's really the government who has to take the initiative.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Megha Nagpal, please ask the question.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, sir, and thank you so much for such a knowledgeable lecture. So my question is that if in your opinion, and I would want to know your opinion regarding this, do you think that the laws have really failed to tame this unruly horse effectively? Because there has been a branch of litigation emanating from arbitral awards itself. So I wanted to just know your opinion regarding this parallel litigation emanating out of a concept which is supposed to probably reduce the burden on courts.
I think the reason is simple for this. The reason that there's a problem with this public policy aspect is, look, it is all very well to talk about public policy in the abstract, but the reality is that every time in an arbitration, and when there is an award, there is a winner and there's a loser. And the loser then rushes to his lawyer and says, sir, this is very unfair. What can I do? So the default in India is to file a challenge. And that has been sought to be curtailed by the new amendment that you have to deposit the amount under 36. But just to give you a contrast, I was in England, and one day there was a matter in the court, and the judge had 2 petitions listed under their equivalent of section 34. And the judge came in and said, I am under a lot of pressure. How will I do 2 cases today? Whereas, as you know, you can imagine the number of cases that are listed here. And one is the number of cases, and the other aspect which is there, and to answer your public policy question, we in India have a very different approach. The reason why there are only 2 cases before the High Court, the Commercial Court in London, is not because the Britishers or they are less inclined to challenge an award. They have also lost. They also want to challenge. But the reason they don't challenge is because if they lose, first of all, the likelihood of loss is high. And 2, if they lose, they will be punished with massive costs. So that is not our Indian policy. We want our courts to be more accessible to people. In India, you do not really normally, I mean, therefore, Justice Nariman is 1 out of 30, very unusual. It is not normal, even if you lose, that you are awarded actual costs. I mean, even in that case where he awarded 50 lakhs, Dr. Singhvi was appearing. And the matter went on for 6 days. I'm not sure that even there the 50 lakhs would have covered the actual cost. And I think Mr. Sibal was appearing on the other side. So that's the answer. The answer is public policy can never really be tamed because we have to see it in our Indian context.
So there is one more question I have in the Q&A box. With your permission, may I place them before you, sir?
Please.
So this one question has come from Ms. Ritam Khanna. One of the criticisms of public policy is that it is a weapon used by Indian courts to interfere in international awards. So, sir, what in your opinion is what is your opinion in this aspect with respect to the public policy as it is seen with respect to arbitration in other countries?
You see, this is again a criticism which I don't agree with. Why? It is right that maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, Indian courts did interfere. You have to understand the scenario then, the realities then, foreign exchange restrictions, the fact that foreign lawyers were much better prepared, the fact that the contracts were one-sided, the fact that arbitrations in London and Paris, arbitrators were hostile to the third world. All that is there. Today, the situation is different. The reality is that public policy defense, by and large, fails. In fact, I can confidently say, particularly in these challenges before the Delhi High Court, I've appeared in many of them, Glencore, Extrata, then there was that case dealing with Malvinder Mohan Singh, the dispute relating to the Fortis dispute. Most cases, ultimately, the High Court and the Supreme Court, then the Cruise City, vast majority of cases where the public policy defense has been set up, Indian courts have declined to interfere. The problem is, as Mr. Nariman says, again, I'm back to quoting Mr. Fali Nariman. He says, and I think it's so true, he says, will convention awards be enforced in India? He says, yes, if the foreigner has the tenacity and endurance to last out. So the problem is not that we are interfering. The problem is that our court system is such and the pressure is such that it takes time. And the classic case is Central Trade, where I had appeared. There were 3 rounds. It has taken 20 plus years for us to win ultimately. And we have won in the Supreme Court in round 3 in 2020. So the problem is not the law, but the practice of enforcement.
Thank you, sir. So there is another question by an anonymous attendee. Sir, with respect to the question asked by Rajneesh, sir, this was with reference to the attendee who had gone live. The question is, I wanted to ask that to bring India at par with other countries like Singapore and to develop this approach of arbitration, how many years would in general be required?
So, I mean, I don't think this is a fair comparison. We are not Singapore. We are India. We are a democracy. We have a vastly larger number of people. I can tell you a very interesting story about Singapore, which I will in a moment. Yes, there are 2 types of arbitration. There is international commercial arbitration and there's domestic arbitration. We should be focusing on, see, in all these seminars and talks, we have fancy lawyers like me doing fancy work in fancy countries. That is 1% of the arbitrations in India. 99% are domestic. Our focus has to be on domestic. And domestic, yes, we need to build up institutions, right? Nobody is going to leave Singapore and come to India and say ours is a better seat until we have an integrated system where the courts also have a separate channel where only arbitration awards are taken up and only those awards are enforced. And that will require a massive sort of change of mind of the government. And I am asking a question as an arbitration lawyer. Why should an arbitration matter be given preference over a criminal matter? Why should an arbitration matter be given preference over a matter of national importance? So those are questions. It's very easy as an arbitration lawyer to say, no, we must have every arbitration matter heard in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, every commercial matter to have heard in 1 year. What about matters which may be more important? So we should not be looking to Singapore or London. We should be looking to India. We should be building up our institutions. We should be judging our progress against ourselves and not in comparison to other countries. Now, let me give you the Singapore example to answer the anonymous user, person. There was a judge in Singapore, a Chief Justice, I think it was Chan Sek Keong, I'm not sure about the name. He was told by the then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, famous man, that I have delays in my courts of 20, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, just like India, do something. There's the difference between Singapore and India. He decided that from tomorrow morning, there will be a deadline, a limit. You will file in 7 days, you will file in 10 days, you will reply in 10 days, you will reply in 15 days, whatever it is, this is the limit. Everybody has to comply with it. 99% did not comply with it. He dismissed all the cases. Finished, no areas. Can you do it here? Are we a democracy or are we a, can we do it here? We can't do it here. So all areas gone, finished in 1 year. Very unpopular. I may have got the wrong name of the Chief Justice wrong, but finished in 1 year. All areas solved. So if the Supreme Court says all matters which are time barred, dismissed. All matters which are more than 5 years old are infructuous. Finished. Over. Can we do it? We can't do it. So our system is different, and we should not be getting into this concept of we should be Singapore. I've seen them. They are no better than us. We have our own advantages.
Sir, thank you, sir. Sir, there is another question from one Ms. Shobit Betal. The question is, sir, how different is patent illegality, which was earlier formulated in saw pipes and after amendment brought into the statute appearing as patent illegality on the face of the award? Is both the things different?
So actually, we had a little debate about this when the Law Commission was going on. And patent illegality, first of all, was brought in because of saw pipe. But if you see on the face of the award, where does this come from? This is not from saw pipe. So on the face of the award is because under the 1940 law, there was a challenge which was called error of law on the face of the award. The idea was you can look at an award and say that there is an error of law. You don't have to delve into the facts, deep into the facts. If you have to explain it, then it's not on the face of the award. So compromise formula was patent illegality on the face of the award. Patent because on the face, so patent illegality on the face of this. So the expression is by and large the same. It's a way of saying that if really there is something on the, if you look at an award and it looks that there's something wrong, and it's a illegality, it's a legal error, then you will interfere. So it's a little, shall we say, fluid, but you have to leave something to the good sense of judges, of the High Court judge or the District Court judge who is looking at the award to make a reasonable call. So ultimately, judges are actually very good judges of what is right and wrong. We have to leave something to them.
Thank you, sir. So there are more questions. With your permission, I may kindly place them.
Please.
So this one question has come from Ms. Megha Nagpal. The question is, on a theoretical level, what is your opinion about the dichotomy of party autonomy and legitimacy of inclusion of public policy argument and its interpretation by court? Especially in commercial matters, shouldn't party autonomy supersede everything else?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. You see, party autonomy as a principle is one of the pillars of arbitration. There's no doubt about it. But party autonomy cannot be such that it is completely held to run riot. There has to be a balance. For instance, I'll give you a case. Party autonomy has to be subject to equal opportunity to parties or full opportunity to place your case. So Article 19 may be subject to Article 18. So party autonomy cannot mean, for instance, in a commercial matter, that only one party appoints the arbitrator. Then you destroy the balance. Or party autonomy cannot mean that in the clause it says that I say commercially, it's a commercial bargain, I say only I can go to arbitration, you can't go to arbitration. Or if you go to arbitration, you will have to deposit 10% of your claim that has been struck down by the Supreme Court by a judgment of Nariman. So party autonomy cannot mean license to do whatever you want. Even in a commercial matter, there has to be some degree of control, which is why I go back to Pierre Lally, because you may have arbitrators and awards which are not worthy of respect, and courts will always have control. So I'll give you a concrete example. It's a very interesting example of a very old case called Soleimani versus Soleimani, which is an English case where a father and a son were doing this business of smuggling carpets out of Iran after the revolution in 79. And there was an arbitration by Beth Din, which is the Jewish sort of religious community. They did an arbitration and the son won. But the father went to the court and the Court of Appeal said, look, sorry, this is a completely illegal transaction. It may be commercial. It may be perfectly okay otherwise, but this is completely illegal. Party autonomy cannot be stretched this far. It is illegal. It is immoral. You can't do it. And obviously, I'm sure they would have been influenced by the fact that they were smuggling out Persian carpets from Iran to UK. But that's one extreme case. So there has to be some balance. Yes, there should be party autonomy. In fact, our act also says it. Section 5 also says that minimal interference, but it can't be 100%. There has to be a balance.
So I have another question from another anonymous attendee, which says that, sir, do you think arbitral awards should not be allowed to challenge before the courts? Because if it is challenged, it postpones the finality of the issue to be settled, which I think the question is completely on the other spectrum.
No, I can understand this. You know, there is a lot of frustration in commercial, amongst the commercial population in India, and I see it every day, that, sir, after 4 or 5 years, I've got an award in my favor, and this public sector undertaking goes and challenges it on no ground. But there is an answer to that. The answer is, A, you can't exclude a challenge. Because we are under rule of law, so there has to be a challenge. For obvious reasons, the question is not completely excluding a challenge. The question is the challenge has to be on a narrow ground, which is what I mentioned right at the beginning about food for thought. But the way we have balanced it is, now generally the courts say that, all right, it does postpone the finality of the award, but at least as a temporary measure, you get the full money. Maybe with bank guarantee, maybe without, at least you get the money. And then you fight it out. So, yes, it does postpone finality, but that is part of being in a system governed by the rule of law and being an Indian and having to face the court system. I mean, you can't contract out of the court system in totality.
So there is another question that I have. It says that, will it be fair to say that arbitration, to an extent that has taken shape, of privatization of justice delivery mechanism?
Yes, it is privatization of justice delivery mechanism, but it is something that parties agree on. And to the extent that it relieves the burden from the courts, it's a good thing. And it is not complete privatization of justice delivery, because you still have some access to the justice delivery system in an extreme case. So yes, it is privatization, but it's good privatization.
So, are there any live questions that we have now?
No, none as of now, ma'am.
Not done. So, may I then request Professor Dr. Ravandle sir to give a vote of thanks. And I especially would like to thank sir for such an enlightening session, not just on the law pertaining to arbitration, to explain us the concept so beautifully, but also to give us really an insight into the advocacy that involves the subject. So may I please request Professor Ravandle sir for a vote of thanks.
So good afternoon, and this is like the ones who are attending. I would like to bring this fact to their notice that thought just does not matter if you do not structure it and convey it. And the ones who have paid attention to the presentation you made, it was less word, but there was more meaning to that. And the way it has been narrowed down, rather the approach which you took, and if anybody has to learn research and what research means and how one should do and present that thought in a research manner, your presentation and your talk about it. So I did my graduation in law in the year, completed it in the year 1995. So 92 to 95, and that was the period when this word was talked about. Everybody was talking about ADR, ADR, ADR. And there were two things which were talked. Someone said it's a additional dispute resolution. And there was one section which was talking about alternate dispute resolution. And as a law student, you can understand, we always are confused. Either we don't know or we know too much, or we are confused all the time. That's the thing we were going through. Fortunately, unfortunately, that was not taught to us. Then came the time, but yes, being a student of when I was doing my first post-graduation in law, and we were taught a course on legal theory, and it was in 2 semesters. So the first semester was totally focused on the schools of thought or the schools of jurisprudence. And yes, over the period, what we have seen from natural law, then we went to positivism, then sociological, and then comes the legal realism. And legal realism, sometimes I feel, and that's the time like 1978, the judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court, and then the whole era, and which was so highlighted when people were relating with the legal realism. And if you see, of course, it is also called as American legal realism. They have their own ego to go with. I'm saying this term because they always feel that they realize it first and the world follows it. And we have several situations. If they study the Indian jurisprudence, they will figure it out. But that is another, we don't have to discuss nationalist point here. But the propounders, like if you talk about Jerome Frank or Gray, they always said this, that law will remain, their word was law will remain in mother's womb if not judged by the court. So means the legislators make, but they put those words, but meaning is given by the judges. I see that point way. But truly speaking, the legal realism thought, or this whole jurisprudential thought, is greatly debated only with respect to the domestic point of view. It never was discussed in the international point of view, because when it comes to international law always has been very settled. It is the relations are based upon the principle of reciprocity. So what you give, what you get. So therein as well, when you see the different means of settlement of disputes, it always began with the word negotiation. Then it went to mediation. Then it went to good offices. Then came arbitration, and last one was the judicial settlement. But there was always respect for each other. And international law, though on paper says that whatever may be the size, whatever may be the form of government, whatever is your strength, but we all are equal. So there is respect to the sovereignty, and there is no disrespect, entertain respect to the sovereignty. So the arbitration, when a dispute between or among nations take place, it is always dealt very differently at the international level. As you rightfully said, but when it comes to the domestic, and we are so, means we hold it so close to us that it's mine, so nobody can. So even if that award is passed, it needs to be, and absolutely it's correct. And that's what we see under the Code of Civil Procedure, then under the ADR regime, that we have started recognizing the reciprocal arrangement as well. And good that we learn from that. And when you talked about part 1 and part 2, and what you related, because part 1 you focus, this is my understanding, you focus how did it unwind in India, like the old legislation, then 1995, and then after, then the part 2 you started with the New York Convention, and wherein then you related the present legislation, the Amendment Act. So means, of course, we also have to focus upon, and in your last few words you said that we have to focus on what is 99%, that is the domestic, and 1% is international. So there is section of people who will take care of it, but we require to take care of what is at the domestic. And you made the point that arbitration is not an alternate, not an additional, but it is one more mean to settle if there are any disputes. So that's a good point which I realized. And this reminded me that we used to, means I like movies a lot and I watch movies a lot. So Gone with the Wind is one of my famous movies. So the teachers always taught us that, you mind it before you say. And the teachers also taught us, see the wind and then take the feel of the wind and then you go. And then they said, then you need to watch Gone with the Wind. And that is what I think that the ADR regime is. That first is the mind and then wind and then Gone with the Wind. But very few have really applied that sense, and they tried. And the judgments which you, because one point which you made, sir, the number of judges, the judges who deliver the judgment, and you were appropriately correct, sir, because when you say, because that matters a lot, because it's a 2 judges bench, then 3 judges bench, people are still not able to make out. They say, what a judgment, but they forget what is the value of their judgment, whether it is binding, whether it becomes a precedent. Because if it's not a higher bench which would take different, then the earlier judgment remains so. And when you were talking about the Renu Sagar, and wherein you made those 3 points, and then of course the judge was Mr. Justice Lodha was kind enough and he accepted that and then reinstated that. And that talks about the highest level of respect which they command, because they correct themselves and they accept that as well. And so I can say that today's session was for me that which reminded about Gone with the Wind, and it was like, getting back the wind into the mind and again Gone with the Wind. And ADR regime is absolutely that way, because people till date are just fighting on the technicalities, but not many are focusing on what is the philosophy which runs behind. And I think that as a academician, I strongly feel that we also need to pay attention to, we want to be mindful to the philosophy than just the mere words. And I think that's where the focus, and you really brought it back, sir. I thoroughly enjoyed your session. And I could say that it was not an advocate, it was not a senior advocate, rather it was a professor of law who was taking the class and who was—
No, not at all.
It was like that, sir. And because it reached to us. Because
I'm
there
glad
was
you
no
did.
sense. There was no sense because, at one point you also said, well, I can say I have little variant here with respect to this judgment, because you also said that ONGC judgment, the first one, and you said that, of course, because I was representing ONGC. But why that point is little variant? Because it paved the way for the next thought. And that next thought came into being in 2015 as well, as we are seeing it. So of course, and there the Oliver Wendell Holmes becomes important, sir, because he says life of law has not been logic, it has been an experience. So we can't just stick it to logic. We have to experience it and live with that experience and bring new things to the forum, and it will bring ultimate what is called justice. And thank you very much, sir. I really enjoyed
you.
it.
Thank you.
And it was a
I
wonderful.
really enjoyed it, and I like the interaction with all the people asking me questions. My only one regret in this is that it could not have been. It should have been in the physical sense. It would have
Yes.
been slightly more
Yes.
interesting. Right?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I would like to thank Ms. Mayuri for
Thank you.
moderating the session, for initiating the idea of knowledge series on law and advocacy. And I will fail if I do not thank Mr. Akshay Alag and Lex Witness, because they always have been there. They are just call away and they always collaborate. And a big word of thank you and a word of appreciation to all the participants. They always are there and they come with such innovative questions, but the meaningful questions. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to
Thank
you
you.
as well, sir. And we'll keep meeting, and we would like to have you on campus. Whenever it opens, you can come and deliver your sessions here too, sir.